if the homeowner pays on time every month. They can forecast at the end of the loan how much money the homeowner would have paid versus how much money it cost the bank to make that loan, and they can determine what that profit right off of that loan would be. Now, obviously, when a homeowner falls behind and can't make payments, that's going to change the overall number for the bank. And so they're going to need to do one of two things: foreclose or change the terms of the mortgage so that the homeowner can afford to make those payments ongoing. In doing either of those, the bank is going to make less money off of this loan than they otherwise would have. What the NPV test does is helps to determine how much will it cost the bank to modify, how much less will they make off of this loan if they foreclose, and how much less would they make if they modify it under the Waterfall test of the HAMP program. There are a number of factors that go into determining all those costs, and we're going to get into those here in a minute. Once that program runs that, it spits out an answer to the bank, and it tells the bank either A, it's cheaper to foreclose. If it is cheaper to foreclose, then the bank has the option. They can either offer a modification to the homeowner, or they can move forward with foreclosure. What we typically see is that the banks, if you don't pass the NPV test, are not going to offer a homeowner a modification, even though they have the option to do so. We have not seen any banks do that. However, if the NPV test spits out the result that, in fact, it is cheaper for the bank to modify the loan, then the bank is required under the HAMP guidelines to offer the homeowner a trial plan under the HAMP program. So it really is a black and white math-based test, this NPV test. It is done the same way, it is done in a similar way no matter which bank you're dealing with. The original model for this NPV test was created by the FDIC, and there's a link there you can actually pull up their model and play around with it. Now, I told you that there's a lot of factors that go into determining if you pass the NPV test or not. You see some of the factors listed here, and again, we're going to look here in a second at the actual FDIC model, but it includes a lot of different things. It will include things such as the value of the home relative to how big the mortgage is, the likelihood of the homeowner falling into foreclosure, again, if they get a modification. Obviously, some homeowners will get a loan mod and then re-default, so they have to factor that in. The home price trends in any particular area, and that certainly can be different depending on which market you are talking about. The cost of foreclosure, the legal fees, the court costs that go along with that. Here, let's look at the actual model for the FDIC. Here is the actual model that is used by the FDIC. So, I'm going to go through here and point out a few things on this screen. So, this top portion right here, this is all information that is going to be homeowner specific. So you can see these things include how much that loan, the original loan amount was, what the term of the loan was, what the current interest rate is, current unpaid principal balance, the remaining months due, or the remaining term due, how many months behind the homeowner is, any advances that have been made on behalf of the homeowner, as well as here, you're going to talk about what their monthly mortgage payment is. Now, these ones in blue are automatically calculated based on the things in gray. Let me just clear this some of this off. So this part, the top part, just talks about where things stand right now. This bottom left section talks about if the borrower was going to, again, the borrower status, the monthly income, things you see in gray are homeowner specific. So monthly income and the current property value. Those are all things that you have to input if you want to try to use this to see how your homeowner might be, how he falls or she falls in this program. The bottom portion of it you'll see here says foreclosure scenario. So the idea is let's look at if we foreclosed, how much is that going to cost us as a bank? Again, we're looking at this from the bank's perspective. So there's a lot of specific information that the bank gets to decide. So home price appreciation forecast. In the model here, it's built in as -5%. This model was put together when the housing market was in its downturn, so pricing was actually declining. There's also something known as the REO stigma discount. The idea behind that is that the same house sold on the open market in a traditional sale will actually sell for a considerable more than a house that's in foreclosure. Just the idea that it is in foreclosure, there's a stigma related to that, and so you traditionally will not see as high a sales price. In this case, they factor in a 20% discount. The months to a foreclosure sale and the months to a REO sale, the idea there is how long will it take the bank to foreclose. Certainly we know that's a lot different from state to state, and even within a state it can be very different. I know here in Rochester we tell people it's approximately a year from the time of filing to the time of a sale. That's approximate. I know we were down in Long Island a couple weeks ago for a training, and down there I think they're looking at closer to 2 to 3 years for a foreclosure to go through. So even within New York there are different time frames. The foreclosure and disposition costs, the idea that the bank is going to have some costs that go along with this. They have to maintain the property. They have to pay the property taxes on that property. There are costs that go along with it. In addition, you've got the fact that in some cases, this zero cure PV loss, what this does is factor in, and this tells you at one point, okay, if we foreclosed, here's the loss we're going to take on this, $60,000. Now, you'll see here there's a cure rate, 15%. The idea there is that some homeowners, if the bank decides to move on with a foreclosure and they don't offer any loan modification, there is a certain segment of homeowners that will come up with the arrearages. They will borrow money from a spouse, they'll borrow money from their family, they may take a loan off their 401k. In some method, they will, in fact, self-cure. So you have to factor that in, that all foreclosures the bank moves forward with are not going to be, are not going to finish off as foreclosures, because the homeowners will get themselves out of that situation. The end result is that if for a foreclosure, you'll see here this bottom line, the PV probability of a loss. So that's the estimated loss, $51,000. Now, up in this top right section is if the loan was modified under the HAMP program, how much would the bank lose in that method? Before we go any further, I want to go back a slide and talk about, okay, how is it that a loan gets modified under the HAMP modification? And I know this is review for some folks that have worked with HAMP a lot, but I think it's important to go through for those that have not done so. If the loan is going to be modified under the HAMP program, it is a certain, they call it the Waterfall system of modifying it. And it is consistent across every bank that is part of the HAMP program. It is mandated that they follow these exact steps in order to reduce the payment down to 31%. You'll remember the whole goal of the HAMP program is to take homeowners that are currently paying more than 31% of their gross monthly income to their mortgage, first mortgage, taxes and insurance, and any homeowners association fees. So you have a homeowner that's above 31% ratio, you want to bring them down to 31%. How do you do that? The way they do it is the waterfall test. The first thing in that waterfall test is that they're going to do a capitalization. So they are going to take all of the past due payments that have been missed, any taxes that have been paid on the homeowner's behalf, insurance, attorney's fees, court costs, all those things. They're going to total those all up, and then they're going to add them on to the principal, the current principal balance of the loan. So now you're going to have a new number that would be the new principal balance for this loan. They then are going to reduce the interest rate on that loan, and they're going to do so, they're going to reduce it by 1/8 of a percentage point. at a time. So what the program, and this is all going to be done in the background in the computer system, but I think it helps to understand what's happening. So the bank lowers the interest rate. Let's say you started at 7% interest rate. They're going to lower it down to 6.875%. That's an eighth of a percentage point. And then they're going to look again and say, okay, now that we've lowered it an eighth of a percentage point, have we reduced the ratio to 31%? No, we still haven't hit that. So now we're going to go down to 6.75%. And again, we look at that ratio. They're going to keep dropping it farther and farther down until they get to a point where the homeowner has reached that 31% ratio. The lowest the bank will lower that interest rate under the HAMP program is a 2% interest rate. They cannot go any lower than that. So if the bank drops the interest rate down to 2%, and then it looks and they say, no, we still haven't reached that 31% threshold that we want to reach, the next step is to extend the term of the mortgage, and it can be extended out to a term of 40 years from the time of modification. Again, the idea that if you spread it out over more years, you're going to bring that monthly payment down and potentially bring it down to 31 or under 31%. If you still haven't reached that 31% after extending the term to 40 years, the next thing they will look at is an interest-free balloon payment. So what they will do is carve out a portion of the unpaid principal balance. They will make it a balloon payment that is due either at the time the house is sold, at the time the loan is refinanced, or at the time the mortgage runs its course and the term runs. That portion that they carve out is interest-free, so that means that the remaining portion, there's less money for interest to be charged on. Therefore, the payment can come down and the ratio can come down to that 31%. It's not a principal that is forgiven. The homeowner will be responsible for paying it, but they will not have to pay it until the end of the loan, and it is interest-free until that time. All of those steps, that waterfall test that I just talked about, it all happens automatically in the background of the NPV program. So we go back to the NPV test, and I've drawn this semi-box here around the value of the modification. So what this tells you is, let me clear some of that. Let me clear some of this off. Okay. What this tells you is that what their modified payment would be at 31%. So in this example that I used, I had a homeowner making $3,500 a month. Their modified payment would have to be $983. The interest rate to get them to that is 3.6%. And you can see down here that it tells you what that new unpaid principal balance would be, what the modified rate would be. In this case, because they didn't have to go down to a floor of 2%, the term has remained the same. You'll see it's 330 months here, 330 months here. So they haven't had to extend the term at all. The Waterfall program dropped that interest rate down, got it to 3.63, realized that's where 31% hits. That's the end of the story as far as what they would need to do to modify that loan in such a way as to satisfy the HAMP requirements. If you look down here further, the value of the modification, so this is the really bottom line thing, is a negative $34,000. Now, that's going to be compared to this negative $51,000 under foreclosure scenario, which is less. It's a smaller loss right here to modify, and therefore the NPV test passes. Now, I know there's a lot of factors that go into this. That's part of what I wanted to show on this slide, is that there are a ton of things that go into determining whether or not a homeowner passes or fails the NPV test. If you look at this screen again, the black arrow I have here, it shows that in this scenario, I had the house listed as a value of $200,000. And in this case, again, it passed. It passed meaning that the bank would be required to offer that homeowner a HAMP modification. Now, in the next slide, I've changed the value of the house just slightly. Change it to $250,000. Now, I know in the work I've done, the homeowners that I've dealt with, oftentimes when they've refinanced, you can find different appraisers that will appraise properties at different values, the same property at a different value. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that you'd find two appraisals, one that says 200 and one that says 250. That difference alone causes this to become a fail of the NPV test. That's just one of the probably 20 input values that are in here. And that alone would change it from pass to fail. Any given factor, if changed, could cause that to pass to fail. The point being that a lot of times we are right around the edges on the NPV test. Now this model is, as I said, the FDIC model. The banks, however, do not use the FDIC model. Any of the banks that are, any of the large national banks, the ones that I think most people on the phone are typically dealing with, have enough business that the Treasury has allowed them a waiver and that the banks can develop their own NPV test. Now, they have to use the same format, but as far as the different values go, so for instance, I talked about these REO stigma discount, the home price appreciation, the costs that go to foreclosure, those types of factors that are not homeowner specific, the bank can determine what they are going to use in those. Now, the banks do have to submit their NPV model to the Treasury Department for review and have to get it approved by Treasury. The idea is that way the banks can't just put whatever they want in here. However, it is a proprietary program that the banks have developed, and therefore they do not release their entire NPV model to the public. It has been something that I know organizations like Empire Justice Center, I'm sure a lot of organizations that are represented on this call have asked for and have pushed for to get those released, but at this point we do not have that. So if you have a homeowner and you're trying to determine, is this person going to be eligible for a HAMP modification, you can run the FDIC program and you can have at least a good estimate as to whether or not they're going to pass, but there is no way to absolutely be 100% certain of what that result will be when the bank runs that program. That is simply, at this point, impossible to do. We're going to talk a little bit more either later on this call or in the next call about challenging the results of an NPV test. But for now, I just wanted to point out the fact that we don't have access to each bank's individual NPV model. I want to go through a couple examples of how the Waterfall program works, because I think it helps to see it in real numbers. So in this example that we're looking at here, we have a homeowner, and this was we put this together when we were doing the training down in Long Island. So the numbers are reflective of prices more in the New York City area. In this case, a homeowner purchases a house for $350,000. In 2009, their mortgage, as you can see, is for $300,000 through a 30-year, 8% fixed rate. In this case, homeowners' income drops. They have a drop from $155,000 to $120,000. They've fallen 6 months behind, and current unpaid principal balance of $289,000. So over here, you can see I put on what their payment total is, $3,350. And that's broken down through the principal and interest, taxes, insurance, the homeowners. So at this point, what this homeowner is facing is a total amount. We've got the interest portion of their missed payments. We've got escrow payments that they've missed. We've got the foreclosure costs, the attorney costs and court costs that go along with it. So a total amount of arrearages of $22,480. So in this case, these are the steps that program goes through. And again, the NPV test does all this automatically, but I think it does help us some understanding of what it is doing. Is the homeowner paying more than 31%? Yes. Right now, their payment is 33.5%. So they passed that initial threshold. They may be eligible for HAMP. Now it's the NPV test. So we're going to capitalize all the arrearages. So their new principal balance would jump up to $31,500. At this point, what the computer program is going to do is lower that interest rate. Again, like I told you, 1/8 of a percentage point at a time. And each time it drops at 1/8 of a percentage point, it checks the ratio to see have we gotten to that 31% yet. So in this case, if you continue to drop the interest rate, when you hit 5.875%, you will end up with a monthly principal interest payment of $1,950 approximately, a total pity payment of $30.99. Just so happens that that is 30.99%. Therefore, no other steps have to be completed. Now, this again, this does not guarantee that the homeowner would get a payment of $3,099. What this says is, and I'll go back to the FDIC model. What this says is, if we modify under the HAMP rules, here's what the payment would have to be. So the payment would be, again, $3,099. Then the program knows what to judge, how much the modification process would cost the bank and how much the foreclosure would cost the bank. And now it can compare apples to apples to see which one is cheaper. So all of this happens prior to determining which is cheaper. They have to know what that payment would be in order to make those calculations. I want to go through one more example, and again, it's similar to the last example as far as it's the same home, but in this case, the homeowner has taken a much bigger hit. Their income is dropped down to $80,400. Again, we have the same amounts that are going to be capitalized. However, because their income has dropped significantly, their payment is going to be much, the 31% is going to be much lower. So in this case, this was a mistake here. I'm gonna cross that out. The income is lower than that. Their ratio is actually up about 50%. As a typo on my part. The important part to know is when we capitalize, again, it's going to be the same principal balance of approximately $311,000. In this case, you could lower the interest rate, and you could go all the way to the floor of 2% here. You're still going to have a payment that's going to be equal to 36.28% debt-to-income ratio. Therefore, haven't gotten to that 31%, we got to go to the next step in the waterfall. The next step is extend that term to 40 years. In this case, that is still going to leave you just above 31%. Therefore, there will have to be a portion of principal that is forbeared. Not forgiven, but forbeared as a interest-free balloon payment. In this case, the forbearance would be $5,363. That's going to equate to a monthly payment of $2,077, a full pity payment, and that is exactly 31%. So in this case, you'd have to go through all of the waterfall steps in order to get to the point where a homeowner gets down to 31%. Now, the way I look at it is that the more the bank has to do in this waterfall, the lower they go in the process. So if they have to go down to 2%, extend to 40 years, and then forbear principal, that's going to mean that the bank is going to take a bigger hit on that loan, which means that the modification, the cost to modify is going to be higher. What it means is it's going to be more likely the homeowner is going to fail their NPV test. The more they have to modify it, the deeper they have to cut into potential profits on that loan, the more likely that a foreclosure is going to be cheaper. So I tell people that just because certainly we have cases where people get this forbearance of principal and it still is cheaper to modify and they get these deals. But the further you go down that list, the more likely it is that you're going to end up with a potential foreclosure. Now, I talked about the fact that the FDIC model is available, and that was the original one that was developed. There is also a Treasury model that's available. It is a little bit different. It's an online tool. It's designed, I believe, for homeowners to use, more user-friendly. So it's all a GUI interface online. It's not a spreadsheet. So you can check that at checkmympv.com. Also, MFY Legal Services out of New York City has a fantastic tool to help you to look to see if a homeowner qualifies not only for HAMP Tier 1, which we're talking about today, but also HAMP Tier 2. And I've given you the link of where you can find the materials for the MFY Legal Services tool. It is, not only do I think it's very user-friendly, they have great instruction sheets that go along with it to take you through step by step and tell you exactly what each box means, what to look at, where to look for the results. There was I believe, a webinar done on that a few months ago. If you are looking for materials, certainly, and you weren't available for that webinar, please let me know or Michelle or Becky within Empire Justice Center, and we can at least get you connected with some documentation and very well maybe get you connected with MFY Legal Services. So there's a number of ways you can go about checking. What I typically do with the clients I work with is that I will input their information into one of these tools just to kind of as a sanity check for myself to see, okay, what's the expected result that I'm going to get? It doesn't, frankly, stop me from submitting paperwork for HAMP on behalf of a homeowner, even if they fail let's say, the MFY Legal Services tool. If they're on the edges, I still look at them and say, I'm going to submit it. Part of that is because the paperwork the banks ask for HAMP reviews is all of the same documentation they're going to want to see to review your homeowner for a in-house modification. So therefore, I'm going to be gathering the same documents anyway. I'd rather have them check for the HAMP review. I've had homeowners that I thought were going to fail the NPV test that actually got a modification offer submitted to them. So you never know. Sometimes, again, because of the way the banks have a proprietary NPV system, all those values are not going to be the same. The non-homeowner specific values are not going to be the same from bank to bank. So there may be cases where somebody is, in fact, eligible that you didn't think so previously, but at least gives you some idea of what you may find. Now, back to the qualification process. Last webinar, we went through the entire HAMP, all the documentation that has to be submitted with HAMP, as well as the proof of income and that sort of thing, the forms that go along with it. So the qualification process, once you submit a complete packet to the bank, these are the timelines that are based off of the HAMP servicing guidelines timelines, just so you know. The bank has to acknowledge that they've received the packet within 10 days. They then have to, within 30 days, offer the homeowner one of three things: either a TPP, a trial plan, a rejection letter, or a letter that says, we don't have everything we need from you, homeowner. You need to supply further documentation in order for us to complete a review for you for HAMP. And this is theoretically, this is what is written in the standards. Now, I can tell you based on the experience of our organization is that rarely, if ever, do we see the banks actually meet these deadlines. And certainly when homeowners are not in the settlement conference process, it is very difficult to get a bank that actually completes these reviews in a timely manner. But that is at least per the standards of the HAMP servicing guidelines. I should note that for the banks that are part of the National Mortgage Settlement, the guidelines within the National Mortgage Settlement are actually much shorter. I'm not going to go into all the details of that today, but I think it's important to know if if your client is with Chase, Citi, Bank of America, formerly the GMAC loans, and fifth bank that I can't remember off the top of my head, Wells Fargo. If they're with any of those 5 banks that were part of that national mortgage settlement, there are some even tighter deadlines that the banks have to meet. But under the HAMP program, it's the 10 days to acknowledge, 30 days to let you know either you've been accepted, you've been rejected, or we need more information. As a tip, I always try to document attempts that I've tried to reach out to the servicer. So if I have not received an acknowledgement within 10 days, we will call the bank to confirm they've received it. We document all of that. If we haven't got a notification within 30 days, we will contact the bank. If the case is in active foreclosure, we'll contact the attorneys for the bank as well, and again, document all of that. One of the things that is talked about in a lot of these trainings is the idea of litigation based on a lack of good faith on the bank's part. In order to prove a lack of good faith, it is vitally important that you document everything that goes along with what you have done. And so to have that documentation to say, we reached out to the bank proactively and we didn't get responses on X date, Y date, and Z date, that's the kind of thing that is going to build your case when it comes to time for litigation. Hang on one second, we've skipped around a little bit. Sorry about that, folks. technical difficulties continue. Okay. If you do get that, I talked about the fact that if you do qualify, you'll get a 3-month trial period plan. Referred to as a TPP. What your homeowner will do is he or she will get a letter from the bank that says, congratulations, you've been accepted into the HAMP program. Your trial period plan payment will be X, $950. The letter will not tell the homeowner anything else that goes along with a potential modification. They're not going to tell them what the interest rate is going to be long term. They're not going to tell them what their new principal balance is going to be. They won't tell them what the breakdown between principal and interest and taxes and insurance will be. All it is a lump sum. Here's what your payment is in the trial plan. Now, there's a couple things to note about that. Number one, the payment during the trial plan is pegged to be at that 31% and therefore is going to be within pennies or a dollar of what their payment will be when they get a permanent modification, the homeowner. So the payment should stay the same. However, we do have this issue where you're asking a homeowner to sign up to be to make payments under a trial plan without knowing what the long-term ramifications are as far as what the terms of a permanent modification are going to be. If you try to contact the bank at that point, at least in the experience that I've had, if you try to reach out and contact the bank at that point, typically what the bank will say is, we can't provide that information to you right now. The documents aren't drawn up, and we can't tell you what it's going to be. Now, I have had a couple banks. I think I've gotten lucky on a couple calls where somebody's been able to try to at least give me some of the information. You can certainly ask them what the previous unpaid principal balance was, what the arrearages are, so you can get to a close approximation of what the new unpaid principal balance is going to be. If you're math inclined, you can try to back into then what that new interest rate is going to be, but it's really a guesstimate. That is one of the issues with the HAMP program currently, but it is one that has not been solved at this point. So homeowners too have to take a bit of a leap of faith in signing on to take part in that trial period plan. Once they've made the 3 trial period payments, the loan is supposed to then be permanently modified. Now, the way that it is supposed to work is that when the homeowner has made their 3rd payment, sometime during that 3rd month, these permanent loan modification documents are drawn up and sent out to the homeowner so that in the 4th month, they have signed a permanent loan modification and can continue to make that same payment. Now, certainly I'm sure not a surprise to folks on the phone. A lot of people here I know have done this work for a while, that's not in fact what we actually have happen. The converting a HAMP trial period plan to a permanent modification can be a nightmare. Certainly when the program first started a number of years ago, within its first year, the biggest issue I think that was facing the program was that you had so many people that got stuck in these trial period plans and not getting them converted to permanent modifications. So we had homeowners that had been in a trial plan for 8 or 9 months, sometimes even up to a year, and I've heard cases that were even longer than that. If it does take longer than 3 months to do it, what we do advise homeowners that we work with is to continue to make the trial period plan payment to the banks. Now, I know that there are, I've talked with some counselors, some attorneys that do not do that. They say once the homeowner's made their 3 payments, they're not going to have them pay anymore. I have found it has been helpful to have them do so. But theoretically, again, they're not supposed to have to pay it beyond that 3 months. Now, when they get the permanent modification, there's a number of things about the HAMP program that really make it the gold standard of modification programs. The first is that the interest rate is locked in for 5 years. Now, we talked about the fact that the interest rate, how we get to that new interest rate via the Waterfall program, the Waterfall test. Whatever interest rate the homeowner is going to have that's going to keep them at that 31% level. So it's going to be somewhere between their current rate and 2%. That rate is locked in for 5 years. After the 5th year, the bank is going to be able to slowly return that interest rate, but the highest it's ever going to get back to is today's current mortgage interest rates. The rates right now are around 4%. Therefore, if you had a homeowner who gets a modified loan and it's anything higher than 4%, that is going to be their permanent interest rate for the life of their loan. If, however, you had a homeowner, let's say, got locked in at a 2% interest rate, they're going to, for the first 5 years, they'll be at 2%. Each year thereafter, the bank can raise the interest rate a maximum of 1%. So in year 6, they'd go up to 3%. In year 7, they would go to 4%. If the rate, the day they sign their modification, is the rate we care about, if the current going rate is 4%, that's the highest that the interest rate can ever return to in the life of the loan. So in the example I just gave, year 6 you go up to 3%, year 7 you go to 4%, that's as high as it's going to get, which means for the life of the loan beyond year 7, it will stay at 4%. So what HAMP avoids is those cases that we saw a lot of in years past, which was they would give a homeowner a lowered interest rate for 5 years with the idea that after 5 years, the terms of the original mortgage would take the note mortgage would take over. Meaning, we had clients that had a 10.5% interest rate. They dropped it down to 4% for 5 years, essentially kicked the can down the road for 5 years, because as soon as that 5th year was over, the homeowner's going to go right back to 10.5%. The idea behind the HAMP program is let's lock them in at a rate that is going to be affordable long term and keep that rate in place. Another important thing with the HAMP program is no down payment. So the idea here is, and we've had a lot of cases like this, where a bank will come back when they were doing in-house modifications and say, you are a homeowner, you have $10,000 of arrearages. We'll take $8,000 and we'll spread that out over the course of the remaining years of the loan. However, as a sign of good faith homeowner, you need to come up with $2,000 up front as a lump sum payment. And oftentimes, the homeowners that we deal with don't have $2,000 set aside. They fall into foreclosure for a reason. They either a lack of income or a lot of expenses. And typically, other bills have oftentimes fallen behind as well. So when the homeowner falls into foreclosure, they may be using extra money to catch up with other bills, or they've used it in other emergency situations. So I've had clients where the only thing that kept the homeowner from keeping their house was not being able to make that upfront good faith payment to a bank. HAMP recognized, the Treasury Department recognized that issue, and so as part of the HAMP program, there can be no down payment required whatsoever for homeowners. So again, that's another big benefit for homeowners. All old late fees are waived when they make this permanent modification. Again, in some cases, that's a small amount of money, but we certainly have seen cases where that runs into the thousands of dollars, and so that is significant. It is going to capitalize all arrearages and foreclosure costs. Another thing that we ran into in the past was that we would get a modification for homeowners. They would say, yes, we're going to capitalize the missed payments. However, after 6 months after they got, or 3 months after they got a modification, suddenly we would see other fees, $2,000, shown up as a line item on their mortgage statement. And when we called the bank, they would say, well, sure, those were fees that we hadn't figured those out yet when we did the modification. And so now your homeowner is once again on the hook for $2,000 today. If they had rolled those into the modification process and spread them out over the course of the loan, the homeowner could have done it. But now the homeowner's situation where, again, they have to come up with a lump sum amount right off the bat. And that's something oftentimes the homeowners can't do. So under the HAMP program, it is important that they capitalize all arrearages and all foreclosure costs, so you don't get caught with those additional fees after the fact. Under the HAMP program, the loan must be escrowed. Oftentimes, that for the clients I work with, they find that to be a real benefit, frankly. One payment to the bank every month. They don't have to worry about trying to save up and pay their insurance, save up and pay their taxes to the local taxing authority. However, I have had clients that didn't want to have it escrowed for whatever reason. They had a situation where they felt they could do it. It would be easier for them to pay those taxes on their behalf. Unfortunately, they cannot do so. It is a requirement under the HAMP program to have the escrow account set up if it hasn't been done so previously. The last thing that is a good thing about the HAMP program, in my opinion, is the borrower incentive payments. So when there are incentive payments both for the borrower and for the servicer. For the borrower, if the homeowners make their payments on time and in full for 12 months in a row, they will receive $1,000 off of their unpaid principal balance. It's either, actually I should say, it's either $1,000 a year or 1/2 a reduction in the annual payments, whichever is less. So if the homeowner, if their payment went down more than approximately $80 a month, they're going to qualify for that $1,000 a year. If their payment went down less than $80 a month, it's going to be less than $1,000. It's going to be whatever the payment went down per month times 12. This is going to happen for the first 3 years the homeowner is in this program. So they could receive up to $3,000 of principal balance forgiven. That is not a forbearance, but actually totally forgiven, just by making their payments on time and in full. So again, that's not going to make or break anyone's loan, but it's a very nice benefit to have. Briefly, I want to talk about how HAMP and bankruptcy intertwine. I am not a bankruptcy attorney, and I'm not going to try to pretend to be one on this call, but I do work around it enough to have some familiarity with it. There are some important things to know about HAMP and bankruptcy. If you're in an active Chapter 7 or an active Chapter 13, that does not disqualify you from HAMP. In fact, the servicers must review you for HAMP at that time. If you have had a bankruptcy in the past and have had it discharged, even if the homeowner has not reaffirmed the debt, the servicer again must consider you for a review. If you file bankruptcy while you're in a trial period plan, so you've already received your 3-month trial period, and then you file bankruptcy, you cannot be denied a permanent loan modification just because you filed bankruptcy. Now, income verification, there are some different guidelines as far as what you need to show as proof if you are in bankruptcy and you want to be part of the HAMP program. If you have questions on that, I would suggest looking to the HAMP servicing guidelines that are available on hmpadmin.com because they go through in great detail what could be different. You may have to include your bankruptcy schedule as well. I think the opinion of the folks here at Empire Justice Center is, if possible, we always attempt to hold off on a bankruptcy until a loan mod is done. This is not for, this is frankly for very practical purposes, which is when we work with a bank, and oftentimes with the bank's attorneys, it is hard enough to deal with that organization, just working with one group within that entity. When you then bring in the bankruptcy group, so now you've brought in a whole other unit, having to work with having 2 different groups within the bank actually work with each other and then work with you, I have found is darn near impossible. It's very difficult and a real nightmare. And so just from a practical purpose, if the homeowner is not in a dire situation where they need to file that bankruptcy today or next week, but they have some time, we suggest let's try to get the modification done first, and then we can turn to let's get the modification done first, and then we can look at bankruptcy. So that's the order that we typically say, and again, it's from a practicality purposes more than anything else. Some miscellaneous stuff about HAMP. The servicers cannot start a foreclosure proceeding or conduct a foreclosure sale while in the HAMP review. However, here in New York, what that means is if they have if they have filed the foreclosure summons and complaint, it does not mean that they have to freeze the process where it is while they review for HAMP. So the banks will continue through the settlement conference process. They can get all the way up to the date when they would schedule a sale. They just can't actually schedule the sale itself. But they can work right through, get their order of reference, get a referee appointed. My understanding is they can do all of that while the HAMP review is being done. Now, obviously, if you're in settlement conference, our push would always be to the court that until the bank has completed that review, they haven't acted in good faith, and so therefore it should stay in settlement conference. Here in upstate New York, in Monroe County specifically, we have a judge who is very favorable to that opinion, and therefore will let it stay in settlement conference. But I know in some parts of the state there are judges, law clerks who may kick a case out of settlement conference while the HAMP review is being done. A single point of contact is must be assigned. Again, that's per the HAMP documentation. A lot of organizations push that for a long time because calling up, you get a different answer every time you talk to someone at the bank. There is a downside to having a single point of contact, I will say, which is that now that one person has been assigned to that file, that's the one and only person the bank wants you to talk to, and it can be very difficult to get a hold of that single point of contact. We have cases where the single point of contact has hundreds of files assigned to them, and so catching them when they actually are not on the phone can be really difficult. And leaving them a voicemail, even though they say they're going to get back to you in 24 hours, I have found that's not always the case. So there is a downside, an upside and a downside of that single point of contact, but that is the requirement at this point. Now, a question came up, somebody asked me is, when are you considered accepted, when have you accepted this offer from the bank? With the HAMP program, you cannot get 2 bites at the apple. So once you have accepted a HAMP trial modification, if you fall off of that plan, you cannot then try to reapply for another HAMP Tier 1 application. If you get an offer from the bank, but you have not made a payment yet, and you decide, I don't want to accept this thing, I'm just going to throw it in the garbage, I'm not going to accept, I'm not going to make any payments on my trial plan, you are not considered deemed accepted. Even though it's been offered to you, you didn't accept it. It's when you make your first payment and it gets received by the bank, that's when you are considered accepting the offer. At that point, if you fall off, you cannot apply again for HAMP Tier 1. You certainly may be eligible at that point for HAMP Tier 2 or some of the other MHA programs, and we're going to talk about those at the next webinar. But you cannot apply again for HAMP Tier 1. Last thing I want to point out here is that if you are reviewed for HAMP Tier 1 and you've been denied by the bank has to review you again if you want them to, if you have a change in financial circumstances. So you have a homeowner who gets denied but then gets an increase in their hours at work. They get a new job. They get a pay increase. They get qualified for Social Security when they weren't qualified before. Anything like that would be a change in financial circumstances. The bank is not only supposed to, they are required to review you again for that HAMP Tier 1 program. So if you have that change in financial circumstances, definitely I would encourage folks to apply again. Last thing in today's today's webinar I want to talk about is just the interplay of the settlement conferences and the HAMP program. Oftentimes, and again, this is going to be different depending on what part of the state you're in, but we have found here adjournments are very common if the bank is, as I said earlier, if the bank is reviewing a homeowner for the HAMP program, at least here locally, we find the courts will allow an adjournment so the bank can complete that review. If you're rejected from the HAMP, oftentimes you can leverage the settlement conference process to get answers. So, and we're going to talk about in the next webinar, is if you get denied, what exactly is the bank supposed to provide to you? What can you ask for as far as further information? How do you escalate a denial? We're also going to talk about some of the things that come along after you get a permanent modification you have to look for, as well as non-HAMP modification programs that are out there. So we still have a lot of things to cover at the next webinar. But for this one, as far as when you're in the settlement conference process, if you get denied, oftentimes I will ask at that point, well, is there somebody at the servicer that I can talk to get more information about this? A lot of times the local attorneys will say, yes, please, I don't want to have to be the middleman. You call them directly. They've now given me permission to call their client, and exactly who the person is I'm supposed to talk to, oftentimes that person has a lot more information on the file than the attorney that's just given me the update in court who got an update 5 minutes before they walked into the courtroom. Yet the reason why the NPV failed. The bank is required to send you the homeowner a letter saying that the homeowner, if they have failed the NPV test, why they failed the NPV test. Again, we're going to go over the form of that letter and kind of what you can do to push back. However, if the bank has not provided that, oftentimes we'll go into court and we'll get just an oral response from the other side, a verbal response. They will say, nope, your client didn't qualify for HAMP. They failed the NPV test. And I will tell the court, that's not enough. The bank is required to send my client a letter which states that they failed, why they failed, and to give more information and a chance for us to appeal it, or if we want to appeal it. In those cases, oftentimes we've been able to get an adjournment from the court in order for us to allow us the time to review that documentation the bank's going to send. It never hurts to ask, I guess, is the bottom line there, is that oftentimes we've been able to get more information than we probably legally were obligated to receive, but because the bank attorney might not have had knows all of the ins and outs of what's required and what's not, they're willing to give us more information. So we're always asking for it. If we get it, that's great. I want to be cognizant of time because we're right up here at 1 o'clock. So we're going to stop at that point with the substantive information. However, I know, Michelle, I know that you need to talk about the CLE credit. I want to make sure that was given out to everyone.
Hi, Kevin. Actually, I usually do a quick announcement in the beginning of the webinar, but at this point, everyone should have received an email from me this morning. It did have instructions on what to do for CLE credit. There's an attorney affirmation form that was attached to the email. If you didn't receive that, shoot me an email. I put my email address in the chat. And the code for today's webinar is 55K as in Kevin 90. So record that code on your attorney affirmation form and send it to me, and I'll be issuing the CLE credit. I'd like to say it would be within 30 days. However, I am running a little bit behind, so I'm hoping to get everything out to everyone the beginning of next week or so. And that's all I had, Kevin.
Thank you, Michelle. I've put up here as well my email number and my direct phone number. If you have questions on what was covered today, please reach out. I'm always happy to offer any help I can. As I said, we are going to be doing a third portion of this webinar. I believe it's going to be next month. You will be receiving emails regarding exact date, so please be on the lookout for that. But I thank everybody for their time today, and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Thanks, everyone.